Big Shaq walked through downtown Chicago one chilly autumn evening, his designer coat wrapped tightly around his broad shoulders. The streetlights cast long shadows as he made his way back to his parked car after a charity basketball event. That's when he noticed her, an elderly woman huddled in a thin blanket near a bus stop, her military veteran cap visible even in the dim light. Something about her dignified posture, despite her circumstances, made him pause. The woman wasn't begging or asking for help, she simply sat there, clutching a small photo frame to her chest. As a former military man himself, Big Shaq felt a connection. He'd seen that look before, the look of someone who'd given everything for their country but somehow fallen through the cracks. "Ma'am," he called out softly, approaching slowly so as not to startle her. "It's getting pretty cold out here. Would you mind if I sat with you for a minute?" The woman looked up, her weathered face showing surprise at being addressed so respectfully. Her name was Rose, she told him, and she'd served as a combat medic in Desert Storm. Life had thrown her some cruel curveballs after her return, a devastating house fire, mounting medical bills, and the loss of her husband to cancer had left her with nothing but memories and that photo she held so carefully. Big Shaq listened intently as Rose shared her story. She spoke without self-pity, her voice steady as she described how she'd saved countless lives on the battlefield, only to find herself unable to save her own husband or preserve their life together. The photo she held was of their wedding day, the one possession she couldn't bear to part with. "You know," she said, managing a small smile, "I never thought I'd end up here. But life has a way of humbling even the strongest among us." Those words struck a chord with Big Shaq. He thought about his own journey, the struggles he'd faced before finding success, and how easily circumstances could have been different. Without saying a word, he made a decision that would change both their lives. "Rose," he said, pulling out his phone, "I know it's late, but would you trust me enough to come get something to eat? There's a 24-hour diner just around the corner." At first, Rose hesitated, years of street wisdom making her cautious. But something in Big Shaq's genuine concern won her over. As they walked to the diner, he noticed her slight limp, an old war injury, she explained. The diner was quiet, with just a few late-night customers scattered around. As Rose warmed up over a hot cup of coffee and a proper meal, she gradually shared more of her story. She'd been homeless for 8 months, moving between shelters when she could, but often finding them full. Despite everything, she still volunteered at a local veteran support group whenever possible, helping others even while struggling herself. Big Shaq was moved by her resilience and dedication to serving others. As he listened, he began making calls, first to his personal assistant, then to a hotel nearby. Rose protested when she realized what he was doing, but Big Shaq was gentle yet firm. "Tonight, you're getting a proper rest," he insisted. "And tomorrow, we're going to start figuring this out together." What Rose didn't know was that while she was finishing her meal, Big Shaq had already set bigger plans in motion. He'd contacted his foundation's director, explaining the situation and setting up an emergency meeting for the next morning. But he kept this to himself, knowing that sometimes help needs to come in small, digestible pieces. As they drove to the hotel in his heated car, Rose clutched her precious photo frame and fought back tears. "Why?" she asked simply. "Why would you help a stranger like this?" Big Shaq thought carefully before answering. "Because we're not really strangers, Rose. We're both veterans, we're both human beings, and sometimes life puts us in the right place at the right time to make a difference." That night, as Rose settled into a clean, warm hotel room, the first proper bed she'd had in months, Big Shaq sat in his car for a long time, making more calls and planning. He knew that one night of comfort wasn't enough. Rose needed sustainable help, a path back to stability, and most importantly, she needed to regain her dignity. As he finally drove home, Big Shaq reflected on how a simple walk to his car had turned into something so meaningful. He thought about all the other veterans out there, facing similar struggles, and how many people simply walked past them every day. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities to help Rose, but for now, he was grateful for this chance encounter that reminded him of what really mattered in life. The story was already spreading through the late-night staff at the hotel and diner, not because Big Shaq had publicized it, but because genuine acts of kindness have a way of touching people's hearts. The diner's cook had refused to let Big Shaq pay for Rose's meal, and the hotel manager had quietly upgraded her room without being asked. As the city settled into night, two lives had intersected in a way that would ripple out to touch many more. But that was just the beginning of a journey that would inspire countless others and remind everyone that sometimes the biggest changes start with simply stopping to listen to another person's story. The autumn wind continued to blow through Chicago's streets, but tonight, thanks to one person choosing to stop and care, there was one less veteran facing its chill alone. And tomorrow would bring even more surprising developments in this unfolding story of compassion, dignity, and the power of human connection. The next morning, Rose woke up feeling disoriented in the soft hotel bed, momentarily confused by her surroundings. The events of the previous night came rushing back as sunlight streamed through the window. She hadn't dreamed it, a famous basketball player had actually stopped to help her. At precisely 9 a.m., there was a gentle knock at her door. Big Shaq stood there with a warm smile and a bag containing fresh clothes from a nearby store. Behind him was Dr. Chen, a respected veteran affairs specialist he'd contacted the night before. "Hope you got some good rest, Rose," Big Shaq said warmly. "I hope you don't mind, but I thought we could have breakfast and talk about some possibilities for moving forward." Over breakfast in the hotel's private dining room, Dr. Chen listened intently as Rose shared her story in more detail. The doctor took notes, particularly about Rose's medical needs and her previous attempts to navigate the Veterans Benefits system. What had seemed like an insurmountable bureaucratic maze began to look more manageable with experienced help. "The system can be overwhelming," Dr. Chen acknowledged, "but you're not alone anymore. We're going to tackle this together." Big Shaq then revealed his morning's work. His foundation had located a transitional apartment complex specifically designed for veterans. A unit would be available for Rose within days. But what touched Rose most wasn't just the offer of housing, it was how Big Shaq and Dr. Chen spoke to her with respect, treating her like a person of value rather than a charity case. "I don't know how to accept all this," Rose whispered, her hands trembling around her coffee cup. "It feels like too much." Big Shaq leaned forward, his expression serious. "Rose, do you remember what you told me about treating wounded soldiers? How every life was precious and deserved a fighting chance? Well, you deserve that same chance. Consider this your medical evacuation, we're just getting you to safer ground so you can heal." That afternoon, Big Shaq's assistant arrived with paperwork from the VA office. Through his connections, they'd managed to expedite Rose's case review. The assistant, a young woman named Joy, had also brought something else. She'd found several veterans' job training programs that could use Rose's medical experience. As they worked through the paperwork, Rose began sharing more stories from her service days. She described the young lives she'd saved, the bonds formed in the field hospital, and the skills that had become second nature. With each story, her posture straightened a little more, as if she was gradually remembering who she was beyond her recent hardships. "You know," Joy said thoughtfully, "the downtown Veterans Clinic has been looking for someone to coordinate their peer support program. With your medical background and personal experience." Rose's eyes lit up for the first time in months. The idea of being able to help other veterans while getting back on her feet herself, it felt right. It felt like purpose. Big Shaq watched this transformation with quiet satisfaction. He'd seen this before, how hope, combined with practical support, could awaken something in people that hardship had buried. But he also knew that recovery was a journey, not a destination. Later that afternoon, as they drove to look at the transitional apartment, Rose clutched her precious wedding photo and shared more of her story. She spoke about her late husband, about how they'd met in the service, and how they'd dreamed of opening a small medical training center for aspiring combat medics. "He always said I was the best teacher he'd ever seen," she said softly. "Said I had a way of making complicated things simple." Big Shaq filed this information away, an idea beginning to form in his mind. But for now, he focused on the immediate next steps. The apartment complex turned out to be perfect, clean, dignified, and filled with other veterans who understood the journey from military service to civilian life, including its potential pitfalls. The complex's manager, a retired Air Force sergeant, welcomed Rose warmly. "We've got a good community here," he explained, showing them around. "We look out for each other." As the day drew to a close, Rose found herself sitting in her soon-to-be new apartment, surrounded by people who were already working to help her rebuild her life. The space was small but clean, with basic furniture and even a small balcony where she could grow some plants. "Tomorrow," Big Shaq said as they wrapped up the day's arrangements, "we'll get you settled in properly. But there's one more thing." He handed her a new phone. "This is yours now. My number's already in it, along with Dr. Chen's and Joy's. You're part of our network now, Rose. No more facing things alone." As Big Shaq left that evening, he saw Rose standing on her new balcony, holding her wedding photo and looking out over the city with renewed purpose. Sometimes, he reflected, the biggest achievements in life weren't about scoring points or winning games, they were about recognizing the inherent worth in another human being and helping them find their way back to themselves. The story was far from over, but already it had begun to spread through the veterans community, rekindling hope in others who struggled. And in the coming days, Rose would discover that this second chance would lead to opportunities she never could have imagined. The next few weeks brought dramatic changes to Rose's life. With a stable place to live and support network in place, she began to rebuild her life piece by piece. Each morning, she woke up in her small but comfortable apartment, the morning sun warming the potted herbs she'd started growing on her balcony, a small reminder that growth was possible even after the harshest winters. Big Shaq hadn't just provided temporary help, he'd set in motion a comprehensive support system. The job training program at the Veterans Clinic turned out to be perfect for Rose. Her years of combat medical experience, combined with her natural teaching ability, made her an invaluable addition to their team. The clinic's director was particularly impressed by her ability to connect with younger veterans struggling with their transition to civilian life. "You have a gift," the director told her one afternoon, after watching her calm a distressed young veteran. "You speak their language. You understand both worlds." Rose found herself slowly opening up to her new community. The other residents in the transitional housing complex became like family. They shared meals, stories, and most importantly, understanding. There was old Pat, who made sure everyone had a hot cup of coffee in the morning, and Cloud, a young Navy veteran who helped Rose learn to use her new phone properly. One evening, as Rose was organizing her small office at the clinic, Big Shaq paid a surprise visit. He'd been keeping tabs on her progress through Dr. Chen but wanted to see for himself how she was doing. He found her surrounded by training manuals she'd been adapting for the clinic's peer support program. "I've been thinking about what you told me," Big Shaq said, settling into a chair. "About your dream of opening a medical training center with your husband." Rose paused, her hands resting on the manual she'd been reviewing. "Yes," she said softly. "It seems like a lifetime ago now. What if it wasn't just a dream?" Big Shaq leaned forward, his expression earnest. "The Foundation's been looking to expand its veteran support programs. We have the resources, and you have the experience and passion. What if we could make it happen?" Rose sat in stunned silence, her late husband's words echoing in her mind about her teaching abilities. But, how? Over the next hour, Big Shaq laid out a plan. The Foundation would provide initial funding and space within an existing community center. Rose would develop the curriculum, drawing on her years of experience and understanding of what combat medics really needed to know. The program would prioritize veterans interested in medical careers, creating a pipeline of skilled professionals who understood the unique challenges of military medicine. "It won't be easy," Big Shaq cautioned. "There's a lot of work ahead, but you won't be doing it alone." That night, Rose sat on her balcony, holding her wedding photo as she often did when making big decisions. But this time, instead of feeling overwhelmed by loss, she felt a sense of purpose. Her husband had always believed in her ability to teach and heal. Perhaps this was how his dream could live on. The news spread quickly through the veterans community. Offers of help began pouring in, retired doctors willing to volunteer their time, medical supply companies offering equipment, and veterans eager to enroll in the program. What had started as one man's compassionate act on a cold night was blossoming into something that could help countless others. Rose threw herself into the work, spending hours refining the curriculum and meeting with potential partners. Her apartment became a hub of activity, with volunteers coming and going, all drawn by her vision and dedication. The herbs on her balcony multiplied, now joined by flowers, signs of her own continuing growth and healing. One afternoon, while reviewing applications from potential students, Rose found herself thinking about that night at the bus stop. How close she'd come to giving up, how one person's decision to stop and show kindness had changed everything. She picked up her phone and called Big Shaq. "I need you to know something," she said when he answered. "What you did, it wasn't just about giving me a place to live or a job. You gave me back my dignity, my purpose. And now, with this training center, we're going to do that for others." Big Shaq listened, moved by the strength in her voice. "You did the hard part, Rose. You never gave up, even when things were at their worst. All I did was remind you of who you've always been." As word of the training center spread, media outlets began reaching out for interviews. Rose was hesitant at first, uncomfortable with the attention, but she realized her story could inspire others who were struggling. She agreed to a few carefully selected interviews, always emphasizing the importance of community and never giving up hope. The autumn winds were blowing again through Chicago, but this year they carried the promise of new beginnings. In her pocket, Rose carried the key to not just her apartment, but to the future training center. Her wedding photo now sat proudly on her desk, no longer a reminder of what she'd lost, but of the legacy she was building. And every so often, when Big Shaq visited the center to check on its progress, he'd find Rose in her element, surrounded by eager students, teaching them not just about medicine, but about resilience, hope, and the power of human kindness to transform lives. The medical training center's opening day arrived on a bright spring morning. Rose stood at the entrance, her heart swelling with emotion as she watched the first group of students, all veterans, file into the newly renovated building. The space, once an abandoned warehouse, had been transformed into a state-of-the-art facility with classrooms, practical training areas, and even a small coffee shop run by veterans in recovery. Big Shaq arrived early, wanting to be there for this milestone moment. He watched from the back as Rose addressed the inaugural class, her voice steady and confident, a far cry from the woman he'd met at that bus stop months ago. "Each of you sitting here today has a story," Rose began, looking around the room. "Like me, you've faced battles both on and off the battlefield. This center isn't just about learning medical skills, it's about finding your purpose again, about using your experiences to help others." The first class consisted of 25 veterans, each carefully selected from hundreds of applicants. Among them was a young woman who'd served as a helicopter pilot before losing her leg in combat, and an older gentleman who'd spent years struggling with PTSD before finding stability through helping others. As Rose led the first training session, her natural teaching ability shone through. She had a way of breaking down complex medical procedures into understandable steps, mixing in real-world examples from her combat experience. The students hung on her every word, recognizing in her someone who truly understood their journey. During the lunch break, Big Shaq pulled Rose aside to share some news. His foundation had secured additional funding to expand the program. They could now offer scholarships to cover living expenses for students who needed extra support during their training. "This is becoming bigger than we imagined," he said, watching the students interact in the break room. "But I've never been more sure about an investment." Rose nodded, thinking about how far she'd come. "You know what's amazing?" she said softly. "Every morning, I wake up excited about the day ahead. That's something I hadn't felt in years." The center quickly became known for its innovative approach to medical training. Rose had insisted on incorporating mental health support and peer counseling into the curriculum, understanding that healing wasn't just about physical wounds. She brought in counselors who specialized in veteran issues, making sure her students had all the support they needed to succeed. One day, about a month into the program, Rose noticed one of her students, a quiet young man named Thunder, struggling with a particular procedure. After class, she asked him to stay behind. "What's really troubling you?" she asked gently, recognizing the look in his eyes, the same one she'd worn during her darkest days. Thunder broke down, admitting he'd been sleeping in his car for the past week, too proud to ask for help. Rose immediately sprang into action, connecting him with the center's support services and the Veterans Housing Network she'd become part of. By that evening, Thunder had a safe place to stay and a renewed determination to complete the program. Word of the center's success began spreading through veteran communities across the country. Other cities started reaching out, wanting to replicate the model. Rose found herself conducting virtual training sessions, sharing her curriculum with emerging programs in other states. Big Shaq's foundation received recognition for its innovative approach to veteran support, but he always redirected the attention to Rose and her team. "This isn't about charity," he would say in interviews. "It's about giving skilled people the opportunity to use their gifts to help others." The center's coffee shop became a gathering place for veterans in the community. Rose often started her day there, listening to the buzz of conversation and watching as new friendships formed over steaming cups of coffee. The walls were decorated with photos of graduating classes and thank you letters from patients who'd been treated by the center's alumni. One morning, as Rose was preparing for class, she received an unexpected visitor, the bus driver who used to see her at the stop where Big Shaq had found her. He'd read about the center in the local paper and wanted to see it for himself. "I used to worry about you," he admitted, looking around the busy facility. "I never imagined. This is incredible." Rose showed him around the center, introducing him to students and staff. As they walked, she shared her vision for the future: satellite centers in other cities, expanded programs for family members of veterans, and partnerships with major hospitals. That evening, after everyone had left, Rose sat in her office, looking at her wedding photo. She'd given it a new frame, but kept the original one in her desk drawer as a reminder of where she'd come from. Next to it now stood a group photo of her first graduating class, their faces beaming with pride and purpose. Big Shaq stopped by on his way home from practice, as he often did. He found Rose working on plans for the center's expansion, her desk covered in blueprints and proposals. "Sometimes I wonder," she said, looking up at him, "how many other veterans are out there right now, sitting at bus stops, thinking they're alone. How many just need someone to stop and show them they matter?" Big Shaq nodded thoughtfully. "That's why we keep going. That's why this place is so important." As they looked out over the city lights, Rose realized that her journey had come full circle. From being homeless and hopeless to helping others find their way back, it was more than a success story. It was a testament to the power of human kindness and the ripple effect it could create in countless lives. Summer arrived in Chicago, bringing with it a wave of new developments for the training center. Rose had just finished overseeing the graduation of her first class, a moment that filled her with indescribable pride. 23 out of the original 25 students had completed the program, each one already placed in medical facilities across the city. One particularly hot afternoon, Big Shaq visited the center with unexpected news. The governor's office had taken notice of their success rate and wanted to establish similar centers across the state. They were offering substantial funding and support to make it happen. "Your little idea has caught fire, Rose," Big Shaq said, watching students practice emergency response scenarios in the main training room. "But I need to know, are you ready for this kind of expansion?" Rose took a moment before responding, her eyes following the precise movements of her students. "You know, when I was living on the streets, my world had become so small. Now it feels like it grows bigger every day. Yes, I'm ready." The expansion plans brought new challenges and opportunities. Rose found herself traveling to different cities, meeting with local veteran groups and medical professionals. Each location had its own unique needs and challenges, but the core principle remained the same: veterans helping veterans heal and rebuild their lives. Back at the original center, something beautiful was happening organically. Former students who had graduated and found employment in local hospitals were returning to mentor new students. They brought real-world experience and understanding that no textbook could provide. One such graduate was Lightning, a former Marine who'd struggled with severe anxiety before finding his calling through the program. He now worked in the emergency department of a major hospital and spent his free time teaching at the center. "Rose gave me back my purpose," Lightning told a local newspaper. "Now I get to do the same for others. It's like a chain reaction of hope." The center's coffee shop had evolved into more than just a gathering place. It became a hub for informal mentoring sessions, job interviews, and support group meetings. Veterans who weren't even enrolled in the program would stop by, drawn by the sense of community and understanding they found there. One day, while Rose was reviewing applications for the next class, she received an unexpected call. It was from a military hospital in Germany. They'd heard about the program and wanted to send some of their medical staff to learn from her approach to veteran care and rehabilitation. "Your model is unique," the hospital administrator explained. "The way you combine medical training with peer support and mental health care, it's exactly what we've been looking for." That evening, Rose shared the news with Big Shaq during their weekly check-in meeting. He wasn't surprised. "You've created something special here, Rose. Something that speaks to a universal need for healing with dignity." The international interest led to a new dimension of the program. Rose began developing online training modules that could be shared with medical facilities worldwide. She worked late into the nights, ensuring that each lesson carried not just technical knowledge but also the compassion and understanding that had become the center's trademark. As the program grew, Rose never forgot her own journey. She made sure that every new location maintained the same principles that had helped her rebuild her life: respect, understanding, and unwavering support. Each center had its own housing assistance program, mental health services, and community outreach initiatives. One morning, while conducting a training session, Rose noticed a familiar face in the doorway. It was Dr. Chen, the veteran affairs specialist who had helped her in those first crucial days after Big Shaq found her. "I had to see it for myself," Dr. Chen said, embracing Rose warmly. "You've created something remarkable here." They spent the afternoon touring the facility, now 3 times its original size. The walls were lined with success stories, photos of graduates working in hospitals, clinics, and emergency services. Each image represented not just a job placement, but a life transformed. That evening, after everyone had left, Rose sat in the coffee shop with Big Shaq, sharing a quiet moment amidst the day's busy activities. Through the window, they could see new students practicing CPR techniques in the courtyard, their movements confident and purposeful. "You know what I love most about this place?" Rose said, warming her hands around her coffee cup. "It's not just about learning medical skills. It's about finding your way back to yourself. Every person who walks through those doors is carrying some kind of wound, visible or invisible. Here, they find more than just training. They find healing." Big Shaq nodded, remembering that cold night at the bus stop. Sometimes the biggest victories in life don't happen on a basketball court or in an operating room. Sometimes they happen in small moments, when one person chooses to stop and care. As they sat there, watching the sun set over Chicago's skyline, both knew that this was just the beginning. The ripple effect of that one act of kindness continued to spread, touching lives far beyond what either of them could have imagined on that autumn night when their paths first crossed. The center had become more than a training facility. It was a beacon of hope, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, and a reminder that every life has purpose and value, waiting to be rediscovered. As autumn returned to Chicago, the training center celebrated its one-year anniversary. The occasion brought together students, graduates, staff, and supporters for a day of reflection and celebration. The facility had grown beyond anyone's expectations, now occupying an entire building complex with state-of-the-art simulation labs and specialized training areas. Big Shaq arrived early that morning, carrying a special surprise. He'd worked with local veterans organizations to arrange a dedication ceremony. The main building would now be named after Rose's late husband, honoring both his military service and the dream he and Rose had shared. When Rose saw the new signage being unveiled, tears welled in her eyes. "He would have loved this," she whispered, touching the letters of his name. "He always said that helping others was the best medicine for a wounded soul." The anniversary celebration brought unexpected guests. Among them was a high-ranking military official who had heard about the center's success. After touring the facility and meeting with students, he pulled Rose aside. "What you've built here," he said, gesturing to the bustling hallways, "it's exactly what our veterans need. We'd like to implement your program at military medical centers across the country." The news left Rose momentarily speechless. She thought about all the veterans still struggling to find their way after service, how many could benefit from this opportunity. But she also knew that rapid expansion could risk losing the personal touch that made the program special. That evening, she called a meeting with her core team, the first graduates who had stayed on as instructors, the support staff who kept everything running smoothly, and Big Shaq, who had become not just a benefactor but a trusted advisor. "We need to grow," Rose explained, "but we need to do it right. Every new location has to feel like this one, a home, not just a school." The team worked late into the night, developing guidelines for expansion while preserving the center's essential spirit. They created a comprehensive training program for new instructors, ensuring that every location would maintain the same blend of medical expertise and compassionate care. One of the most touching moments came when Thunder, the student who had once been sleeping in his car, presented his plan for a student support network. Now a successful paramedic, he wanted to ensure that future students would have all the help they needed to complete their training. "No one should have to choose between their education and a place to sleep," he said, his voice firm with conviction. "We take care of our own." The military partnership brought new resources and opportunities. The center began receiving advanced medical equipment for training, and graduates found themselves in high demand at military hospitals and veteran care facilities. Rose insisted that the program maintain its open-door policy for homeless veterans. She never forgot her own journey and made sure there was always room for those who needed a second chance. The coffee shop continued to serve as an informal entrance point, where veterans could come in, grab a hot drink, and learn about the program without feeling pressured. Big Shaq's foundation expanded its scholarship program, ensuring that financial barriers wouldn't prevent qualified candidates from enrolling. He often visited the center between games, sometimes bringing along teammates who would share their own stories of overcoming adversity. One day, a local news crew came to film a feature story about the center. They interviewed graduates working in various medical roles across the city, capturing the ripple effect of the program. The reporter asked Rose what made the center different from other training facilities. "Here, we understand that healing isn't just about bandages and medications," she explained. "It's about restoring dignity, purpose, and community. Every person who walks through these doors carries both wounds and wisdom. We help them transform their experiences into something that can help others. The story aired during prime time, reaching millions of viewers. The response was overwhelming. Calls and emails poured in from veterans, healthcare organizations, and potential donors across the country. But what touched Rose most were the messages from people who said the story had given them hope. As the center prepared for its next phase of growth, Rose made sure to preserve the little touches that made it special. The herb garden she'd started on her apartment balcony had inspired a rooftop garden at the center, where students could find a quiet moment of peace between classes. The walls continued to fill with photos and success stories, creating a visual timeline of lives transformed. One evening, as Rose was leaving the center, she noticed a familiar scene, a homeless veteran sitting at a nearby bus stop. Without hesitation, she approached him, just as Big Shaq had approached her that fateful night. "Would you like to come in for a cup of coffee?" she asked gently. "It's getting cold out here." The man looked up, suspicious at first, then seeing something in Rose's eyes that told him she understood. As they walked toward the center's warm lights, Rose shared her own story, watching hope slowly kindle in the man's eyes. Big Shaq, leaving late from a meeting, witnessed the scene from his car. He smiled, knowing that the cycle of compassion was continuing, spreading from one life to another, creating a network of hope and healing that grew stronger with each passing day. The center had become more than a training facility or a success story. It was a living testament to the power of second chances and the enduring strength of the human spirit. As Rose often said, sometimes the greatest act of courage is simply believing in someone else's potential. Winter descended upon Chicago, bringing with it an unexpected opportunity. The success of the training center had caught the attention of international veteran support organizations. Representatives from various countries arrived to study the program's unique approach to rehabilitation and medical training. One snowy morning, Rose welcomed a delegation from 3 different continents. As she led them through the facility, a veteran from Australia noticed something special about the atmosphere. "It's not just a school," he observed. "There's a feeling here, like everyone belongs." Rose smiled, remembering her own first days of transformation. "That's exactly what we've tried to create," she explained. "A place where healing and learning happen together." The international interest led to an innovative development. The center began offering virtual training sessions, connecting veterans worldwide. Rose would often start her days early, teaching combat medical techniques to groups in different time zones, sharing not just knowledge but also the spirit of hope that had become the center's trademark. Big Shaq's involvement had evolved too. He'd started bringing other professional athletes to visit the center, many of whom were veterans themselves or had family members who served. These visits turned into regular mentorship programs, adding another layer of support for the students. One particularly cold afternoon, a young woman walked into the coffee shop, clutching a newspaper article about the center. She introduced herself as Sky, a former combat medic who'd been struggling to find her place in civilian life. She'd traveled across 3 states after reading about the program. "I didn't know where else to go," Sky admitted, her hands trembling around her coffee cup. "Everything feels broken." Rose recognized the look in Sky's eyes, the same one she'd had that night at the bus stop. Without hesitation, she began the process of enrolling Sky in the program, ensuring she had housing and support. Big Shaq's foundation immediately offered a scholarship. The center's approach to healing continued to evolve. They'd added art therapy sessions, recognizing that some wounds needed more than traditional medical treatment. The walls now featured artwork created by veterans, each piece telling a story of recovery and renewal. One project particularly touched everyone's hearts. Students began creating memory quilts, incorporating pieces of their military uniforms into beautiful patterns. Each quilt told a story of service, struggle, and survival. The quilts lined the hallways, adding warmth both literally and metaphorically to the space. Rose's own journey had become a source of inspiration for many. She often shared her story during orientation sessions, showing her wedding photo and speaking about the night that changed everything. Rock bottom, she would say, can become a foundation to build something beautiful. The center's impact began showing up in unexpected ways. Local hospitals reported improved outcomes when working with the center's graduates. The unique combination of medical training and personal experience made these veterans particularly effective in crisis situations. Big Shaq noticed another pattern emerging. Veterans who completed the program weren't just finding jobs, they were becoming leaders in their communities. Many started their own support groups or mentorship programs, creating a network of care that extended far beyond the center's walls. One evening, as snow fell softly outside, Rose received an unexpected call. A major medical university wanted to study the center's methodology, potentially incorporating elements of the program into their standard medical curriculum. "They're particularly interested in our approach to trauma-informed care," Rose explained to Big Shaq during their weekly meeting. "They say our graduates have something special, a deeper understanding of healing." The coffee shop had become a model for similar venues across the country. Other veteran facilities began creating their own gathering spaces, understanding the importance of informal support networks. Rose made sure each new location maintained the same welcoming atmosphere, a place where anyone could walk in and find community. As the center approached its second year, Rose noticed something remarkable. The success stories weren't just about individual transformations anymore. They were about families healing, communities strengthening, and a new understanding of what was possible when people believed in each other. One morning, Rose arrived early to find a group of students already gathered in the coffee shop. They were helping a new arrival, a veteran who'd walked in off the street, drawn by the warmth and activity he'd seen through the windows. "We've got you, brother," she heard Thunder say, as he poured the man a coffee and began explaining the program. Rose watched quietly, her heart full. The cycle of compassion was continuing, growing stronger with each new connection. That evening, as she prepared to leave, Big Shaq stopped by with some news. The foundation had secured funding to open 5 more centers across the country. But what made Rose happiest wasn't the expansion, it was knowing that each new location would carry forward the same spirit of hope and healing. As they stood looking out over the snowy city, Rose thought about all the lives that had been touched, all the stories of redemption and renewal that had begun within these walls. "You know," she said to Big Shaq, "sometimes I think about that night at the bus stop. How close I came to giving up. How one moment of kindness changed everything." Big Shaq nodded, understanding the weight of that memory. "That's why we keep going," he said softly. "Because somewhere out there, someone else is sitting at their own bus stop, waiting for a reason to believe again." The snow continued to fall, covering the city in a gentle blanket of white. Inside the center, lights burned warm and bright, a beacon of hope in the winter night, promising shelter, purpose, and the chance for a new beginning to anyone ready to take that first step forward. 2 years had passed since that fateful night at the bus stop. The training center network had grown to include 15 locations across the country, each one carrying forward the spirit of hope and healing that had begun in Chicago. On a bright spring morning, Rose stood on the stage of a large auditorium, preparing to address the largest graduating class yet, 300 students across all locations, connected via live stream. Big Shaq sat in the front row, just as he had for every graduation ceremony. He watched with pride as Rose, now a nationally recognized advocate for veteran healthcare and rehabilitation, adjusted the microphone. The woman at the podium bore little resemblance to the one he'd met that cold night. Her eyes sparkled with purpose, her posture radiating confidence and dignity. "When I look at all of you today," Rose began, her voice steady and warm, "I see more than graduates. I see warriors who chose to keep serving, healers who understood that their own wounds could help others heal. Each of you has a story of struggle, but more importantly, each of you has a story of triumph." The ceremony was being broadcast nationwide, with veteran organizations and medical facilities across the country tuning in. The program had become a model for veteran rehabilitation, combining medical training with holistic healing approaches that addressed both visible and invisible wounds. During the ceremony, a surprise announcement brought tears to many eyes. The Department of Veterans Affairs had officially adopted the center's curriculum as part of their national rehabilitation program. Rose's approach to veteran care would now reach thousands more lives. After the ceremony, the coffee shop was packed with celebrating graduates and their families. The walls, now covered with hundreds of success stories and artwork, told the story of countless lives transformed. Among the crowd was Sky, who had arrived broken and lost just months ago. Now she stood tall, ready to begin her new role as a trauma nurse. Big Shaq made his way through the crowd to where Rose was speaking with a group of new graduates. "Remember," she was saying, "your journey doesn't end here. It's just beginning in a new way." Later that evening, after the celebrations had quieted, Rose and Big Shaq took a walk to the old bus stop where their paths had first crossed. They'd made it a tradition to visit this spot on important days, a reminder of how far they'd come and how many lives had been touched by that single moment of kindness. "You know what's amazing?" Rose said, touching the bench thoughtfully. "Every single graduate today will go on to help others. The ripple effect is endless." Big Shaq nodded, remembering that first night. "That's the real victory," he said softly. "Not just changing one life, but creating a wave of change that keeps growing." As they walked back to the center, they passed the rooftop garden, now a flourishing space where students found peace and healing among the plants and flowers. Rose's original herbs from her apartment balcony had been transplanted here, a living reminder of her own journey from survival to growth. The next morning, Rose arrived early as usual. In the coffee shop, she found a young veteran waiting, clutching a newspaper article about the program. His hands shook slightly as he introduced himself. Without hesitation, Rose sat down across from him, just as Big Shaq had done for her that night. "Would you like to hear a story?" she asked gently. "It begins on a cold night at a bus stop." As she shared her journey, she could see hope beginning to kindle in the young man's eyes. Another life about to change, another story of transformation about to begin. The cycle of compassion continued, growing stronger with each new connection, each act of kindness, each moment of understanding. That evening, as the sun set over Chicago, Rose stood on the center's roof garden, surrounded by the herbs and flowers that had become symbols of renewal. Below, the lights of the city twinkled like stars, each one perhaps marking another soul in need of hope, another life waiting to be transformed. Big Shaq joined her, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the shop below. 2 years, he said, handing her a cup. "Did you ever imagine it would grow like this?" Rose smiled, thinking of all the lives touched, all the healing that had taken place, all the hope that had been restored. "You know what I've learned," she said softly. "Sometimes the biggest miracles start with the smallest acts of kindness. One person stopping to care, one moment of compassion, one decision to believe in someone else's worth." As they stood there, watching the city below, both knew that their work was far from over. But they also knew that every life transformed became a new source of hope, every graduate became a new agent of healing, and every act of kindness created ripples that would continue to spread, touching lives far beyond what either of them could see. The story that began at a bus stop had become a movement, a testament to the power of human compassion and the enduring strength of the human spirit. And somewhere in the city below, someone else was about to find their way to the center's warm lights, about to begin their own journey from darkness to hope, from survival to purpose, from broken to healing. Because that's how hope grows, one life, one moment, one act of kindness at a time. And in that simple truth lay the real miracle of Big Shaq and Rose's story, that sometimes the greatest victories aren't won on basketball courts or battlefields, but in those quiet moments when one person chooses to stop, to care, and to believe in the possibility of transformation.